On August the 16th, 1918, during the First World War, a British tanker named the Mirlo was carrying gasoline up the coast of the Outer Banks. The ship was opposite Rodanthe when it was struck by two torpedoes from a German U-boat. The initial explosions split the ship in half and started a fire. The captain ordered the crew of 51 to abandon ship. 2 lifeboats were launched, each designated to carry a maximum of 18 people. The first lifeboat made it safely away from the burning ship. The second boat capsized, and the sailors on board went into the sea. Then, a third explosion released the cargo of gasoline, and the sea was covered with fire. This is the 20th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Today's readings bring us to a consideration of the difficulties experienced by those who choose to follow Jesus instead of the conventional wisdom of the world. The first reading from the Old Testament tells of the trials of Jeremiah. Jeremiah lived in a time of crisis. He had advised 3 kings, contended against idolatry, and endured the destruction of Jerusalem. In the passage that we hear today, people who oppose Jeremiah convince the king to deliver Jeremiah into their power. They throw him into an empty well where he would be left to die. Yet, God intercedes through Ebed-Melech, a Cushite, that is, an Ethiopian, to save Jeremiah. The Chicamico life-saving station near Rodanthe was called into action to save as many of the crew of the burning Mirlo as possible. The head of the station was a man named Johnny Midget, and it took him and his crew 30 minutes to launch a surf boat into the rough seas. Once they were past the breakers, the life-saving crew rowed out to the first lifeboat, instructing them to continue on to shore. Midget and his crew then rowed 5 miles out to the dying ship, where a wall of fire blocked their path. In the second reading, the writer to the Hebrews encourages the community to strengthen their faith, to use Jesus as their model in response to persecution and the demands of living a Christian life. The writer refers to a cloud of witnesses, those who knew and had experienced Jesus, the fire of his presence, his healing, and his teaching. Through these witnesses, God comes to the aid of God's people, preserving and maintaining the fire of their faith. Captain Johnny Midget and his crew encountered the miraculous that day. The wall of flame and smoke moved aside, and the life-saving crew spotted the capsized lifeboat. They pulled 6 men out of the water. The sailors reported that 19 men on the stern of the sinking ship had launched a small lifeboat, but drifted away into the smoke and the fire. The crew began to row the surf boat in the direction that the lifeboat had last been seen. 9 miles later, Midget and his crew found the floundering lifeboat and the 19 men. They attached a line from the surf boat to the lifeboat and then rowed the two boats back to shore. It had taken 6.5 hours, and 42 of the 51 crew were saved. The gospel passage today begins with Jesus telling his disciples, "I have come to set the earth on fire, and how I wish it were already blazing." Jesus goes on to say that the fire that he starts will not bring peace to the earth, but rather division between members of each household. Jesus is clear that as each individual decides for him or herself whether to live as a true follower of Jesus, there will be a straining and a wounding of relationships between those who are willing to follow him and those who refuse. Johnny Midget was one of many midgets who figure in the local history of the Outer Banks up to this day. The life-saving station at Chicamacomico still functions as a U.S. Coast Guard station. And there are many stories of the sea, shipwrecks, and rescues around the barrier islands called the Outer Banks. Jeremiah lived in a time of peril. The life-saving service came about to address times of crisis and peril in rough seas. The letter to the Hebrews calls the church to live a life of faithfulness in adversity. The men who rowed the boats and led the crews depended on their skill and training to save others in adversity. And Jesus tells us today there is a cost for spreading his good news. The men of the life-saving crews who were willing to expose themselves to the danger of a burning, sinking ship, the dangerous seas, they understood the potential costs of their actions. They had faith that their skill and commitment to those in peril would bring them safely back to the shore. The readings today pose a question to us of whether the fire of believing in and following Jesus is a fire that we can endure. The fire that opposed the life-saving crew was a fire of this world. The fire that Jesus announced to his disciples is a fire of the Spirit. We will face worldly and spiritual fires of our own. There will be personal rough seas to navigate. Yet, with Jesus as our model, we can persist in our effort and in our faith, arriving safely on the shore of his eternal kingdom.